was the first building built on our square after it was laid out. The town itself was laid out in 1810 by Colonel Frederick Evans. And just as soon as he finished laying out Beavertown, he was summoned to Fort McHenry in Baltimore. He was the chief engineer in the building of Fort McHenry, and of course by 1812 it had been finished. Sir Admiral Cochrane, who had sailed up the Potomac and burned Georgetown and burned the White House and burned the Capitol, was given orders to sail up through the Chesapeake Bay and burn Baltimore. But they hadn't accounted on the fact that there was a Fort McHenry in the interim. Most of the people in the fort were Pennsylvania Germans from our area, and of course they just fought valiantly, and bombs burst in air and the flag was still there. So the gentleman who laid out Beavertown was the chief architect of Fort McHenry, and he has a history all to himself. But our history today concerns Beavertown. In 1845, Moses Spaeth built the building, the brick is still the original brick in 1845 on the second story. The whole building was a brick building, but it was designed as a convoy house. It was a hotel and bar, and a real hotel, because in those days a stage route went right through here, and this was a stage stop. Although there was a stage stop down where Glen Crutcher lives, that would be at the next block. That was the initial stage stop. There were two stage lines that went through, but Mosey's became the more popular one. There was all kinds of anecdotes surrounding it, but now in 1850 approximately, he built the addition to his hotel and put in a general store, which sold all sorts of implements and dry goods, everything. It was a general store, meaning he sold everything. He was also the sheriff of Snyder County, and he was also the postmaster. He was also a great builder. He built that himself, and then there are several other buildings in town which we won't be talking about on our tour, but I'm just going to mention them. The very first sanctuary church was the Reformed Church. He built that in 1850. In 1880 he built the Lutheran Church in Beavertown, which is now has been, shall we say, secularized and shown now by Davy Jones, who someday hopes to open a museum there, and also to have plays and public musical events on the second floor. He built the Dries' Red Bridge, which is right outside of Beavertown, and he built a house down here on Chestnut Street, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But his store, and in those days, in the 1850s, they called them stands, S-T-A-N-D. His stand was the largest in Snyder County. And there were a lot of them around, Selinsgrove and, well, you name it. But that was the largest in Snyder County. About 1870, A.H. Bowersox built the brick building down the street, which is a sort of a pale green. And then that became the largest store or stand in Snyder County. Whereupon Moses Spaeth added an addition to the rear of the store, making it the largest store or stand in Snyder County. And A.H. Bowersox went right around and built an addition in this store to the rear, making it the largest, and it remained the largest until both of them went out of business. Now, besides that, when Moses Spaeth was not the postmaster, A.H. Bowersox was. Now, I'm going to continue forward here about 50 years. At some point when Moses Spaeth sold his complex house to the mining family in 1890, everything continued. The store continued under Butch Ryan's direction. at some point the Butch Ryan family moved into the quarters here. The hotel was abandoned, but the store continued. And then when they sold out, they sold it to the Walker Brothers, and the Walker Brothers sold it to Bob Young, etc. But during the year of the Walker Brothers, they applied to the Borough Council to get permission to put underground gas tanks in. And the council granted them permission to do so, and it was done. At the very next council meeting, A.H. Ira Lepley came down to the council and requested permission to put pumps at his site, whereupon it was granted. So this competition of who had what when continued right into my lifetime and into yours too, Dave.
Yeah, but Lepley lasted.
Yeah.
Lepley's lasted much longer.
But right here where you're standing, Karen, was another set of gas pumps that Mel Bubb put in. He sold golf gas. So we had a gas pump here, at least one there, and one down at Lepley. I think Lepley had two because they sold kerosene. Although at the later years it was removed, you had to go inside and get a hand crank thing for kerosene.
I worked for Stan in the store when there was gas in it.
Yeah, yeah. So it's rather interesting that there was competition, and not hard feelings, but friendly competition. And now, Moses had the only hotel in town. There was down here at the stage stop, there were some rooms available. It was called an inn, but he had the only hotel until this building was built in 1850 by George Smith. It was called the Smith Hotel. And essentially, though, it had right here where the bank is now. But later, when a friend of mine lived here, Bill Walker, the whole second floor had a big long corridor, and there were rooms all along it. Now they've remodeled it since it's no longer there. But wonderful hotel, and they built an addition to the rear of it. And on the second floor, they put in a hardwood floor. It's a very large room. And there was an outside entrance. You can still see the doors. If you go to the rear, you might want to check that sometime, where you entered the second floor, but there was an outside covered entrance, covered steps going up, and you went in. It became a dance hall, and it was the most popular dance hall in Snyder County. We had 8 trains coming through Beavertown. 4 of them were passenger trains, 2 from the east and 2 from the west each day. And the trains that brought the people in about late afternoon from both directions, a lot of people on dance night would come here, and then they would take the later train to go home. But it was a very, very popular place. When I was the executive director here in Snyder County back in between about 67, Liz Horner, who was 85 years old, lived on the Isle of Q in Selinsgrove. When she found out I lived in Beavertown, she says, "Do they still have the dance floor up there?" And I inquired, "What dance floor?" And she described this and how popular it was. And then I investigated further and found all these facts. In fact, it was a dance hall. When the dance hall closed, it became the site of the Beavertown High School. And when it closed, during my childhood, there were people that came here and gave tap dance lessons and musical lessons. It was only used occasionally. Essentially, when I was a kid, it was vacant, and Rudy and Vesta Coleman lived in the apartment. This was the door of their apartment, and Vesta used it to hang clothes. She had clotheslines all through this big room, and it was essentially just a place. But there were large mats on the floor, and Bill Walker and I, we were about 9, 10 years old, we would use them for wrestling and jiu-jitsu and so on. It was our huge playroom.